Imagine you wake up every day in a world where the words you use shape the way you think. Not just your thoughts, but your very ability to think critically. In George Orwell's 1984, this terrifying idea becomes a reality with the invention of Newspeak, a language designed to narrow the range of thought. Newspeak isn't just a collection of new words, but a whole system meant to limit how people can express dissent, reduce their capacity for complex ideas, and strip away nuances that challenge the party's authority. It's more than mere censorship. It's a deliberate restructuring of language to shape a person's perception of reality. In a world where language is controlled, so too is the very way people interact with their surroundings, their past, and even their own identity. The mind can only operate within the boundaries that language sets. If a person is deprived of words to express rebellion, to articulate freedom, or to even conceptualize truth, they become docile, easily manipulated. Orwell knew that to control the masses, you must first control the words they use, because words shape thoughts. This isn't some distant dystopian idea. It's a truth that is increasingly relevant in our own time. Have you ever felt that certain conversations, ideas, or even entire movements seem to be framed in a way that limits how they can be discussed? Newspeak didn't stop with Orwell. It has evolved, and it's here now. Orwell's concept of doublethink takes this manipulation of thought one step further. It's not enough to limit language. One must also train the mind to embrace contradictions, to hold two opposing ideas simultaneously, without the slightest sense of cognitive dissonance. Doublethink allows individuals to believe that 2 plus 2 can equal 5, or that freedom is slavery, because they have been conditioned to accept contradictions as part of reality. They don't question these paradoxes. They simply accept them as truth, without hesitation. This psychological phenomenon is far more than just a thought experiment. It's something we see in action today, where contradictory political statements, media narratives, and social ideologies seem to coexist without the public raising an eyebrow. Take, for instance, the modern political discourse, where politicians, corporations, and even social movements often operate with narratives that contradict themselves. One message is broadcast, but it doesn't line up with actions or policies, and yet, people find a way to accept it without questioning. In Orwell's world, this acceptance is not only the result of propaganda, it's the product of a system designed to train people to believe in contradictions. It's an astonishingly effective tool for maintaining control, because it prevents people from critically examining the inconsistencies in their world. Today, we live in a society where the influence of language on thought is pervasive, though often subtler than the totalitarian regimes Orwell warned us about. Newspeak may not be the official language of the modern world, but we are certainly witnessing a manipulation of language on a massive scale. Politicians, media outlets, and corporations constantly reframe language to mold public perception and control the narrative. The term fake news is a powerful example of this phenomenon, a phrase that simultaneously discredits any information that doesn't fit the preferred narrative, while validating questionable or biased sources. The words we use can either open doors to new ideas or lock them shut, making it difficult to even entertain concepts outside the dominant narrative. Consider the ways in which language is used to describe social and political issues. Terms like cancel culture or social justice have evolved in ways that now carry loaded, polarizing connotations. What began as attempts to discuss important social issues have been weaponized, manipulated to fit specific agendas. Just like Newspeak, these terms limit the space for true, nuanced dialogue. They polarize, they oversimplify, and they force people to choose sides without the opportunity for meaningful reflection. So much of our discourse today is constructed in a way that simplifies complex issues into sound bites, framing our understanding of the world in a manner that serves those in power. As Orwell feared, those who control the language are not just controlling communication, they are controlling thought itself. But how much have we really progressed since Orwell's time? In a world where censorship is not always overt, the manipulation of language has become more insidious. On social media platforms, search engines, and news outlets, we see a reshaping of words in real time as language itself becomes a battleground. The difference is that we may no longer be fully aware of how much our understanding of reality has been shaped by external forces. The very words we use to describe ourselves, our experiences, and our world have been carefully curated, often in ways we don't even realize. This phenomenon isn't limited to the political realm. It's pervasive across culture, economics, and even personal identity. Think about the rise of certain terms like sustainability, diversity, or inclusion. While they appear to be progressive, the way they are framed often limits the scope of discussion, discouraging alternatives or deeper, more critical exploration of the ideas they represent. Newspeak, in its essence, is not just a linguistic structure. It's a psychological tool designed to prevent change by locking minds into predetermined categories. As we begin to recognize the patterns in our own world, we may start to wonder, are we living in a world where our thoughts are increasingly constrained by language? Are we speaking in a way that limits our ability to think freely? The power of thought control, as Orwell so profoundly demonstrated, lies not just in the words we speak, but in how those words can reshape our very understanding of what is possible, true, and real. Are we, too, becoming prisoners of our own language? In 1984, Orwell paints a chilling picture of a society that thrives on fear, where the government's power is maintained not by persuasion, but by the constant looming threat of danger. This isn't just about terror. It's a strategic, calculated manipulation of the population's emotional state. The party understands that fear is the most potent weapon in their arsenal, because when people are afraid, they are not only more susceptible to control, but also more willing to give up their freedoms in exchange for the illusion of safety. It's the age-old truth. Fear can paralyze thought, redirect action, and distort reality. The power of fear lies in its ability to make people comply without question, to make them believe that surrendering their liberties is the only path to security. Orwell introduces us to the concept of the enemy Goldstein, a figure created not out of real opposition, but as a symbol of endless threat. Goldstein represents an enemy that never disappears, a constant boogeyman that justifies perpetual warfare, surveillance, and control. By focusing the collective fear of the people on this invisible yet ever-present foe, the party ensures that citizens will never question their leader's authority. This enemy becomes a tool for unity, a way of rallying the masses under the guise of protection. But the truth is, Goldstein is not real. He is a fiction, a weapon of mass manipulation. This principle resonates deeply in our contemporary world, where fear is often wielded by governments, corporations, and even media outlets to justify actions that might otherwise seem outrageous. Look at how crises, whether real or exaggerated, are used to justify invasions of privacy, increases in surveillance, and the expansion of government power. During times of war, natural disasters, or political instability, fear becomes the perfect excuse to pass legislation that curtails individual freedoms. We are told that safety must come at the cost of privacy, that security requires control, that freedom must be sacrificed for protection. But how far can we allow this to go before we realize that what we're giving up is not just our liberty, but our humanity? It's important to recognize that fear is not just something that happens to us. It's something that is engineered. It's an emotion that can be cultivated and directed with remarkable precision. The media plays a huge role in this, subtly shaping our fears and anxieties through sensationalized headlines and stories designed to provoke emotional reactions. Whether it's the fear of a foreign enemy, the fear of losing our jobs, or the fear of social collapse, we are constantly bombarded with messages designed to make us afraid. And just like in 1984, the more we fear, the less we question. But the most dangerous part of fear as a tool for control is how it works on a subconscious level. In 1984, the party doesn't just want to control actions, it wants to control thoughts. Fear, as Orwell shows us, is a means of making people act in ways that are instinctive rather than reasoned. It forces individuals into survival mode, where their primary focus becomes personal safety rather than political or social change. Fear doesn't allow room for questioning the status quo. It only keeps people locked in a perpetual state of submission. And this is where we start to see the connections to our own world. How often do we hear about crises, pandemics, terrorism, economic collapse, only to find that our response is a knee-jerk surrender of our rights? How often do we make choices out of fear, only to realize later that we've given up more than we ever intended? We also see the power of fear and how it shapes our worldview. If you spend your days hearing about threats, whether real or fabricated, your reality becomes one where danger is always just around the corner. This constant state of fear makes us more likely to accept draconian measures, to accept surveillance, to accept the erosion of our freedoms, because we are conditioned to believe that the world is a far more dangerous place than it truly is. The party in 1984 knew that by creating this eternal underlying fear, it could control not just actions, but thoughts. It could mold a society that was too afraid to act against it, too terrified to even think of rebellion. In our world, we are increasingly surrounded by a culture of fear. It's a fear that exists not just in the headlines, but in the way we live our daily lives, constantly worried about economic instability, environmental collapse, or the next political crisis. Fear is a powerful force, and when it's carefully cultivated, it becomes nearly impossible to resist. It's easy to see how fear, when manipulated and amplified, can strip away our liberties and convince us to give up more of our freedom than we would ever willingly part with. The most frightening realization, however, is that we are often unaware of how deeply this fear is woven into the fabric of our society. The question is, are we aware enough to stop it before it consumes us completely? Orwell's 1984 introduces us to the terrifying concept that history itself can be rewritten, not just in the sense of editing records, but in erasing entire pasts and reprogramming collective memories. This manipulation of the past is not a mere tool for the party. It is the foundation upon which their power is built. In the world of 1984, the Ministry of Truth is tasked with constantly altering historical records, changing facts to align with the party's ever-shifting narrative. The slogan, "Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past," encapsulates the essence of totalitarian power. By constantly shifting what people believe to be true about the past, the party ensures that it will never be questioned or overthrown. The past is no longer a fixed reality. It becomes a fluid, malleable substance, easily shaped to fit the needs of the present moment. The terrifying part of this is that the citizens of Oceania are not only forced to accept these revisions, but they are also made to forget the truth entirely. Memory itself is altered to such an extent that people believe in histories that never existed. The idea of objective reality becomes irrelevant because, in this world, what is true is what the party says is true. And what was true yesterday is irrelevant if it contradicts the current reality. This manipulation of the past ensures that the party is never wrong. It simply creates a new history whenever needed. The people, deprived of any reliable source of truth, begin to accept this as normal, never questioning the inconsistency between past and present. This control over history isn't just confined to 1984. It's a powerful tool that has been used throughout history in various forms. Look at how political regimes, totalitarian or not, often attempt to rewrite the past to justify their present actions. Take, for example, the way certain governments erase or downplay uncomfortable historical events in their official records. This isn't just a matter of alternative facts, but of creating a new narrative that fits with the government's agenda. By removing or distorting critical moments in history, these powers try to create a world where their legitimacy is beyond question. Just as Orwell's party uses history as a weapon to solidify their control, governments and organizations today manipulate history for similar reasons: to shape perception, to control the narrative, and to keep the public in line. The rise of digital media has only made this manipulation of history more potent and more insidious. In today's world, information is constantly flowing through the digital landscape: facts, opinions, images, videos. The internet is supposed to be the ultimate repository of knowledge, yet it has also become a place where historical facts can be erased, revised, or distorted at will. Take the phenomenon of cancel culture, where people or ideas are erased from history simply because they are no longer politically or socially acceptable. Through online platforms, videos and articles are taken down, old posts are buried, and inconvenient truths are hidden. History, once documented and accessible, now risks being rewritten by those with the power to control digital platforms. The digital age has created a world where truth is no longer something fixed in time. It is something that can be continuously reprogrammed, updated, and altered in real time. Moreover, the ability to manipulate historical records goes beyond just editing articles or deleting posts. It extends to the very creation of memory. When we look at how events are reported or discussed on social media, we see the narrative shaped not just by facts, but by those who have the power to influence the conversation. The platforms we use to communicate, the algorithms that curate what we see, and the voices that are amplified all contribute to the shaping of our collective memory. The danger here is that over time, we may lose touch with the truth of what actually happened, replacing it with a version of events that suits the narrative of those in control. This process is so subtle, so gradual, that we may not even realize it's happening until it's too late. The loss of an objective, immutable history is also a loss of identity. Our understanding of who we are, where we come from, and how we got to where we are is built upon the foundation of historical truth. When that truth is compromised, so too is our sense of self. It's like trying to navigate the present without a map, without landmarks, and without a clear understanding of where we've been. We risk becoming lost in a sea of competing versions of reality, each version of history as valid as the next, with no way to determine which, if any, is true. As Orwell's novel teaches us, controlling the past means controlling the future. The manipulation of history is not just about controlling the narrative of today. It's about shaping the future in a way that ensures the party's dominance continues. In today's world, this manipulation can be just as pervasive. The question we must ask ourselves is, how much of what we know about the past is really the truth? And how much of it has been carefully crafted to fit a particular agenda? In a world where history can be erased, reprogrammed, and rewritten, how can we ensure that we remain grounded in the reality of what truly happened? And how can we avoid becoming the victims of our own manipulated memories? In 1984, George Orwell introduces the idea of Big Brother, a figure that symbolizes the invasive power of constant surveillance. While in the novel, this surveillance is overt and oppressive, today, the reality is far more insidious. Orwell's concept of mass surveillance wasn't just a prediction of a dystopian future. It was a warning about how the erosion of privacy would lead to the collapse of freedom. The party in 1984 uses surveillance as a tool not only to monitor its citizens, but to ensure their compliance. The cameras in every corner, the microphones hidden in every room, the ever-watchful eyes of Big Brother. All of these serve to create an atmosphere where people no longer feel free to think, act, or even speak without fear of reprisal. The most insidious part of this is that the surveillance isn't just for punishment, it's for control. The party understands that when people are constantly aware that they are being watched, they will begin to police themselves. In our world today, surveillance has become an inseparable part of daily life. We are constantly being watched, not just by governments or law enforcement, but by corporations, social media platforms, and even our own devices. It's easy to forget that every time we unlock our phones, browse the internet, or post on social media, we are leaving behind a trail of data that is being collected, analyzed, and used to predict our behavior. It may seem benign at first, but this constant monitoring has far-reaching consequences. Just like in 1984, where citizens are driven into self-censorship because of the ever-present gaze of Big Brother, we too have begun to censor ourselves. We avoid saying certain things. We tailor our actions to fit the expectations of the algorithms. We mute our true selves in order to avoid conflict or judgment. This surveillance is no longer just a physical presence. It's internalized, woven into the fabric of our daily existence. Consider the rise of facial recognition technology, which has made its way into everything from law enforcement practices to commercial settings. What was once science fiction in Orwell's time is now a part of everyday life. Cameras are everywhere, monitoring our movements, our behaviors, and our identities. While this technology is often marketed as a tool for safety and security, the question must be asked: at what cost does this security come? Just like the party in 1984, we are told that surveillance is for our own good, that it will protect us from crime, terrorism, and disorder. But the question remains: how much of our freedom are we willing to sacrifice in the name of safety? We also need to look at the rise of data collection by corporations. Every click we make online, every purchase we make, every conversation we have on social media, all contribute to a vast digital profile being built around us. This data is used to manipulate our desires, our preferences, and even our political beliefs. But unlike the surveillance in 1984, which is a direct tool of control by the government, today's surveillance is often disguised as a service. We are led to believe that we are participating in a free exchange. We offer our data, and in return, we receive personalized ads, recommendations, and content. But what we fail to see is that this free exchange comes with a hidden cost. The more we give away, the more we lose our privacy, and the more control others have over our lives. It's not just about being watched. It's about the psychological effects of living in a world where privacy is increasingly scarce. In 1984, citizens become so accustomed to being surveilled that they no longer trust their own thoughts. They engage in doublethink, accepting contradictions as part of their reality, simply because the constant surveillance forces them into a state of mental compliance. We see a similar trend today. In a world where every message, every conversation, every post is potentially monitored, we begin to second-guess ourselves. We wonder if our opinions are too controversial, if our posts are too radical, if we're crossing some invisible line. And just like the citizens of Oceania, we self-censor. We become afraid to speak the truth, to express our real thoughts, because the ever-present possibility of surveillance means that our private lives are no longer truly private. This erosion of privacy is not just an inconvenience. It's a fundamental threat to our freedom. Privacy is essential to individuality. It is through privacy that we have the space to think, to form opinions, to explore ideas without fear of judgment or retaliation. When we lose privacy, we lose the ability to be truly free. In 1984, this loss of privacy is portrayed as the ultimate form of control. The party's ability to monitor every aspect of life, every thought, every action, every interaction, renders the individual powerless. In our world, while the tools of surveillance may not be as overt as those in Orwell's vision, they are no less dangerous. The real question is, are we aware of the costs of this surveillance, and are we willing to sacrifice our privacy for the sake of convenience or safety? In the end, the story of mass surveillance is a story about trust. Trust in our governments, trust in corporations, and trust in the systems that have been set up to protect us. But how much trust should we place in these systems? How much should we be willing to surrender? As Orwell's 1984 so vividly warns, a world without privacy is a world without freedom. It's up to us to decide how much we are willing to let the ever-watchful eyes of Big Brother, in its various forms, shape our lives and our world. In 1984, George Orwell paints a chilling picture of a world where individuality is not just suppressed, it is obliterated. In this society, thinking differently is not simply discouraged. It is a crime. The concept of crime think is central to the regime's ability to maintain total control. The party's power comes from the absolute conformity of its citizens, and anyone who dares to challenge the status quo is punished, erased from existence. The party understands that individual thought is the greatest threat to its dominance. If people are allowed to think freely, they may question the party's narrative, and that could lead to rebellion. Therefore, the destruction of individuality becomes the cornerstone of the party's strategy for maintaining its grip on power. The reality of this is that when individuality is crushed, so too is the ability to think critically. People are no longer capable of questioning their environment or challenging the established order. The system imposes a uniformity of thought that permeates every aspect of life. This isn't just about controlling people's actions, it's about controlling their minds. In 1984, this is achieved through the complete destruction of private thought and expression. From the indoctrination of children in the ideology of the party to the elimination of any trace of dissent, the system works tirelessly to create a society where independent thought is no longer possible. In the end, individuality itself becomes a crime punishable by torture and death. The party doesn't just want obedience, it wants uniformity at the most fundamental level of human existence. In the world we live in today, we don't have an overtly totalitarian regime like the one in 1984. However, we are still witnessing the slow erosion of individuality in a society that increasingly values conformity. One of the ways this happens is through the normalization of groupthink. This is the process by which individuals suppress their own beliefs, values, and ideas to align with the views of the majority or those in power. Whether in politics, culture, or social media, there is a growing pressure to conform to a particular narrative. Dissenting opinions are often met with scorn, ridicule, or worse, ostracism. People who challenge the dominant worldview are labeled as outliers, extremists, or even enemies of the state. The more we see this, the more we begin to accept the idea that individuality is something to be ashamed of. One of the most insidious aspects of this process is how it is sold as something positive. We are told that conformity brings harmony, that groupthink is a sign of unity, and that those who challenge the status quo are just trying to divide us. In the digital age, this pressure to conform is even more pronounced. Social media platforms, with their algorithms designed to prioritize popular opinions, create echo chambers where only certain views are amplified. This creates an environment where people feel forced to express opinions that align with the majority, even if those opinions do not reflect their true beliefs. The desire for validation, for acceptance, becomes so strong that many individuals abandon their own convictions in favor of fitting in. In this way, the system doesn't have to actively suppress individuality. It simply creates an environment where people willingly give it up, afraid to stand out or speak out. The most dangerous aspect of this destruction of individuality is the long-term effects it has on our ability to think for ourselves. When we stop questioning, when we stop challenging the ideas that we are told to accept, we lose the very essence of what makes us human. Critical thinking, the ability to question authority, and the courage to be different are what allow us to grow as individuals and as a society. If we let go of these qualities, we risk becoming nothing more than cogs in a machine, our thoughts dictated by the powers that be. Orwell's 1984 shows us that when individuality is destroyed, the very soul of humanity is at risk. The tragedy of the novel is not just the oppression of a people, but the loss of their ability to think freely, to create, to challenge, and to imagine a different reality. In today's world, we must ask ourselves, how much of our individuality are we willing to sacrifice in the name of conformity? How often do we silence our own thoughts because we fear judgment or rejection? The rise of cancel culture, the demonization of dissent, and the pressure to conform to the dominant narrative are all signs that we are losing our grip on individuality. The more we allow these forces to shape us, the more we lose the ability to think independently, to stand up for what we believe in, and to be true to ourselves. The message from Orwell's 1984 is clear. When we let go of our individuality, we let go of our freedom. So ask yourself, are you ready to challenge the system that seeks to erase your individuality? Are you prepared to stand up for your right to think for yourself? The world today may not be the exact dystopia Orwell warned us about, but the forces that seek to control us, to shape our thoughts, are as real as ever. And if we're not careful, we may find ourselves living in a world where individuality is no longer possible. If you found this video thought-provoking, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you can join us on this journey of deep reflection. Don't forget, new videos every day, exploring the ideas that shape our world and our minds. Stay curious, stay awake, and keep questioning.